I'm John Parker. I'm one of the intensivists at the Royal Infirmary. I also am an associate medical director in the trust. And today's session is not a conventional educational session. It's more into leadership and management. So apologies if you're expecting something to do with intensive care. It will be to a degree, but I think there'll be something in this for everybody. I certainly hope there will. And any feedback, please feel free to give it back to me. And if you like these types of sessions, then I'm more than happy to give one on a slightly different topic if that's what people would like. Now, it is fair to say that passion and creativity, when you go to medical school and then become a junior doctor, gets squeezed out of you, and it all disappears, and you become protocolized. Now, one of the core values of this trust is to support passion and creativity. So this session is all about that. And it's all about giving some tools and support to anybody that's got an idea that they want to take forward to improve patient experience, quality of care, etc. It doesn't really matter what it is. But if it benefits our patients, then we should be all for it. So that's what this is all about. Yeah, as I say, hopefully there might be some bits and pieces there that will help somebody somewhere along the way. So who's this guy? Well, he knows everything about ideas and changing culture. In other words, the way we do things. This is somebody called Peter Pronovost, who is an intensive care consultant, who lives and works in the US, and started life in Michigan. He's most famous for developing checklists and implementing them across the United States of America to reduce catheter-related bloodstream infections following the insertion of central lines. Now, he rolled this out, implemented it across his own intensive care units, and then further across the US and latterly across the world, to the point where in 2008 he was named as Time magazine's most influential people, alongside people like the Dalai Lama and Barack Obama. So it's quite some achievement. In his first few years, he estimated that he saved about 200,000 lives, and that now runs into the millions. So an extremely influential character, and no doubt he used some of the techniques that I'm about to talk to you about. But he was all about changing culture, which is a very difficult task in the NHS. So you have an idea. Well, the scope of this session is all about, as I say, taking an idea forward. We will look at things like quality, although quality improvement will be a very small part of this talk, and is a separate entity that deserves its own session. So it's not really about quality improvement. It's really about, obviously, the next steps there, about quality that you've got that you want to breed and implement into clinical practice. So to that end, it's about how you talk to people and try and get your ideas forward. So it's structures in terms of how you may want to talk to management. It's about influencing change. It's about negotiation. It's about persuasion. It's about all those types of things. Okay, so first thing is, you need to have a really good look at your own idea and self-evaluate it. So, will it fly? And that obviously requires you to have a look at it in detail in your own way, in a quantitative way, but also to think about how it might work within the NHS. So What does quality mean? So the World Health Organization and the CQSLE have slightly different definitions, but any idea that you have, you must try to pigeonhole it into one or hopefully many of these particular definitions. So WHO is the STEEP definition. So safety, timeliness of care, equitable, efficient, effective, and patient-centered. So any ideas that you have, you should probably frame them in your head and really quantify them along the lines of at least one of those, so that you can take it forward. This often leads you to have to pitch an idea to a small group or even a large group or a group of managers, a meeting or something. Okay, and in this kind of context, it's a bit like S-bar. Okay, so I guess we're all familiar with S-bar. It's a structured way of talking to colleagues about patients and about what's important to get messages across in the right way. So in management circles, there is an equivalent of S-bar, and it's called format. And format, some people might have seen it in the educational context. It's been around for about 40 years and was developed by someone called Bernice McCarthy, as I say, about 40 years ago. But it's used in influence circles as well, and it helps you helps you frame an idea, and it helps you communicate with people that maybe know nothing about what you're trying to talk about. So essentially, format is all about putting your pitch together in 4 sections. Okay, and those 4 sections are very, very clear, starting with why. So why, it's a sales pitch essentially. Why is your idea so good? What's it going to do? Why is it so amazing? To who? So it's all about selling it and why it's so different. Okay, so that should then lead on to what, and that is, what are you going to do? So this would be broadly the aim of your project, and then backed up by SMART objectives. I'm sure you all heard the term SMART. So so it would be a very clear identification of what your idea is, with clear objectives aligned to it. Now, if ever you watch the news, you'll often see a lot of this going on. So politicians will talk a lot about why and what they need to do, and then usually people interviewing them try to press them on the how and the what ifs. So what after what, there is how. So this is the details of how an idea becomes a reality. So this is the nitty gritty of how something actually happens. So who's doing it, in what timelines, where's the money coming from, etc., etc. So that's the how, and then what ifs is kind of the barriers, the problems that can develop. Okay, so any presentation that you do, you should anticipate what questions you might get asked by the audience that will be challenges to it. Okay, so I've got a clinical example of what this looks like, of something that we've done fairly recently. And that was the rollout of the peripheral noradrenaline process that happened predominantly at LRI, sort of December last year. So why? So why did we feel that giving peripheral noradrenaline might be advantageous? This is particularly in the setting of patients with sepsis in the emergency department. Well, the Surviving Sepsis campaign recommended it, and there were some anecdotes coming from our own units about delayed initiation of noradrenaline and ongoing hypotension was causing increased risk to patients, and the potential intervention of giving peripheral noradrenaline was actually quite low risk. So overall, there seemed to be a potential benefit to patient outcomes in terms of reducing mortality and possible morbidity in the form of reduced renal replacement therapies and so on. You know, there was a big case for that. I'll go into whys and sales pitches a little bit more later on, but that's the why. Then what should you do? Well, then it becomes a little bit more aims and objectives. So based in ED, treating hypertensive patients with sepsis on a protocolized noradrenaline infusion. How is it done? So it has to be an ICU consultant decision initiated in the ED by the DART service according to an existing ICS protocol. What if? Well, couldn't patients get extravasation injuries from the noradrenaline? So there is policies for that and what to do in that instance. Is this possibly a backdoor entry to the intensive care unit by starting anyone on peripheral noradrenaline? So obviously we would say it's ultimately an ICU consultant decision. So that's kind of a summary overview of what a why, what, how, what if sort of structure might look like if you were presenting this kind of process to an outside observer. So business cases. So if you're doing well in moving an idea forward, or maybe not so well, one of the things that is likely to happen is someone's going to ask you to provide a bit more detail on what you're planning to do, and usually our management team will ask for something called a business case. So you know, this is a document to produce essentially based on the why, what, how, what if in many ways. Personally, in terms of business cases and what they provide, this is something that may sometimes be a tactic used by management teams to provide additional barriers to slow down a process potentially. That's a bit cynical of me to say that, but if an idea is exceptionally good, then business cases are usually minimized. So if you're asked for umpteen business cases, that could well be a sign that actually there isn't a great deal of support for something that you're doing, unfortunately. So you know, I'm going to go through this very briefly and basically, but it would fundamentally have a background in it of you know, essentially why you want to introduce something new and why change it, what the current position is, and maybe what the problems are with that, and something called an options appraisal. So this would be some rounded kind of consideration of what all the possible alternatives are, including continuing with the current position and obviously your own favoured way forward, alongside probably some other alternatives, and the kind of resources in terms of people, money, places, etc., that are required for each one of those. And then with that, something called a SWOT analysis, which just stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats. So you'd apply that to each one, and at the end of that, reach a conclusion, essentially weighing up the arguments and saying why your particular idea is the favoured option going forward. So that's all I want to say about business cases, but you know, there's plenty of resources around that you can utilize to look that up a little bit more. So I want a little bit of interactivity now. So influence. So a few weeks ago on the news, there was a story, and that story was around the fact that thousands of tons of rubbish have been cleared up along the M4 corridor over the past 3 years, and it was an outrage. So there was a call for how on earth can we stop people chucking their rubbish out of their cars on the M4? So maybe could I ask you, maybe if I pause the presentation for a minute or two, to think about how we could influence people to stop chucking their rubbish out of a window. So I'll pause it there and we'll give you, say, 2 minutes to think of something, and please come through in the comments or speak on the Teams channel as well. Okay. Okay. I think that's probably less than 2 minutes, but what do people think? You can either enter in the chat and I'll read it out, or if you can, speak through. So how can we stop people chucking their rubbish out their windows?
So I didn't actually have an idea of how to stop them, but there was a country that I was in where they used to have these huge nets on the side of the road if you'd go through kind of tunnels where you'd have slowdowns, and people would purposefully try to throw their rubbish and put it into the net. So it almost became like a game with the public where you had to try and get your rubbish in the net. And I guess people would play like scoring. So what it did is it meant that people didn't throw it elsewhere. They would wait to that bit and try and get it in the net. So at least it kept it to a smaller area. So then it was collected.
Okay. That sounds really interesting. So there's a comment in the chat that says smart cameras to detect objects thrown from cars and find the people. So this is finds. Anything else? So I understand you're having problems with the microphone at the LRI. Someone's come up with the concept of shooting anyone that decides to throw their rubbish out their car. Okay, that's pretty extreme. Anything else that anyone wants to come up? Any way to stop or reduce the amount of rubbish that's thrown out of a car? Okay, so we've got warning signs on a smart motorway. So apart from the nets on the side of the road, which sounds like quite a fun game, it's all very kind of draconian, isn't it? Fining, shooting, warning. So influence is mostly if you're trying to influence culture change in the NHS, you're going to need all the help that you can possibly imagine, because it's very difficult to change anything. So the example I use there is something that's slightly obviously not particularly medical in any way, but the principles are all the same. So the first thing you need to do around influence is a bit like quality improvement. Actually, you need to focus on what the issue is and measure it. So with our rubbish, it would be measuring probably on a weekly basis how much rubbish is actually being dumped, and maybe where, what time of the day, etc. So you get a clear idea of what's going on, and it's a continuous process. So you can tell if something that you do might actually change things. The next thing that you want to think about when you looking to influence the situation is what the crucial moments are that cause a particular vital behavior. Okay, so that vital behavior in the rubbish scenario is quite straightforward. It's someone winding down their car window and deciding that the rubbish in their car is better outside than in. Okay, so it's influencing that particular moment. And in medicine, you can find vital behaviours through a series of ways. Usually, audit projects will throw them up, but particular harm reviews or root cause analysis reviews of events, and this is something that we did in sepsis quite a lot when delays to antibiotics happened, and we found all sorts of reasons why antibiotics have been delayed, such as things like complicated protocols and lack of access to microbiologists, for example, that kind of thing. So vital behaviours that lead to the problem. And then what's called the sources of influence. So you need to think about engaging as many issues, many aspects of the sources of influence, which I'll come on to. And if you engage all 6 of those, then you're 10 times more likely to affect an outcome than you are if you use just 1 or 2. Now, we're only touching on this subject, but a great book to read or look at to sort of explore this in more detail is a book called Influence, The New Science of Leading Change by Grenny et al. It's about 12 quid. I'm sure you can get it through online books as well. So this is a really good read if you want to look into this subject a little bit more, and I would strongly encourage people to do so. Okay, so what are the 6 sources of influence? So you can think about, I guess, human behavior and influence and how it all works along the lines of, first of all, in terms of motivation. So, you know, are you motivating people? What's in it for me or us or whatever? Okay. And then can these people actually do what's being asked of them? And you can break this down into 3 areas: the individual or personal, the social, and the structural or environmental. So you can look at these in 6 areas. So personal, you can think about personal motivation, and this could be, you know, related to someone's values or beliefs, and if you want to change them, you're almost trying to help them love what they hate, so to speak. And then personal ability is really about equipping someone with the skills, the education, training to do the right thing. Now, socially, motivation and ability tend to get wrapped up together, but this is kind of that sort of bottom up, on the shop floor, people encouraging each other and assisting each other to do the right thing. All right. And then there's structural. So this is more about the environment, changing the economy of what's driving what people do. So rewarding, a bit like dogs given treats to do the right thing, rewarding people, making sure that they do the right thing. And then structural ability is about building a system that encourage people to do the right thing. Okay. So you know, it might be the design of a particular building, or it could be teams doing the right, supporting people to do the right thing. It could be equipment that helps you. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is demonstrate this in a little bit more detail, because this is so important. Over the past 8 years or so, we've done a lot of work around sepsis, and use this particular model to help drive quality improvement. So I'm going to touch on each of these areas and give examples of how influence has happened. So personal motivation. So this picture is a guy called Ian, and he was one of our patients on ICU who developed a life-threatening cellulitis and septic shock. Now, he got treated really quickly. And his story is a very positive one, because he only spent a couple of days in ICU before getting to a ward and home. Now, he came and helped us out on one of our World Sepsis Day initiatives, and he's clutching 200 balloons. And those 200 balloons each represent a life that we were trying to save each year by improving the quality of our practice. If when you're talking to people, there's broadly 2 areas where you can influence maybe their thoughts about doing the right thing. You can broadly look at that in terms of data versus stories. Now, depending on what type of person they will respond either to lots and lots of evidence and data as a convincing argument, or they may be taken in by personal stories that kind of help. And the UK Sepsis Trust use this very well, and they often bring out a guy called Tom Ray, who had life-threatening group A streptococcal sepsis about 15-20 years ago, and lost all his limbs and half his face, and survived. But he was a devastating example of what sepsis can do to people. A film called Starfish was made about him, and I say he's often brought out by the UK Sepsis Trust to demonstrate the devastating impact of sepsis and what it does to people's lives. In healthcare, and trying to convince people it's to do the right thing is a little bit more complicated than that. So I'm going to just delve a little bit deeper into perhaps what you need to think about with personal motivation and the audiences that you might talk to when you're trying to bring about culture change. So this is the DISC model. So surrounded by idiots. This is actually a book by Thomas Erickson that illustrates this particular concept. And again, something I would really encourage people to read, because it shows it goes into a lot more detail about what this is all about. Essentially, it's about the personality types of the people that you might come across and how to deal with them to get perhaps the best outcome for you when you're talking to them, and also to think about yourself and where you may sit within this particular diagram. It's a sort of a bit of a simplification of the Myers-Briggs concept, where there are 16 personality types. This drives it down into 4. Now, these 4 are either red, yellow, green, or blue. Red types tend to be aggressive, dominant, competitive individuals. Classically, they are company directors, certain politicians, that kind of thing. You'd probably say that Donald Trump is a bit red. You'd also a classic red personality was Winston Churchill, who famously never read anything that was more than a single sheet of paper long. And that's really important to sort of think about. If you're talking to a red, they don't want to know detail. They don't want life stories. They just want to know bullet pointed facts about how something is going to work for them. And how it's going to make things better. So if you start to become quite long-winded, they'll stop listening to you and move on. Okay, so red people, as I say, tend to be company directors. So the higher echelons of management, perhaps there might be red people lurking about, but generally in the NHS there is very little red. Yellow people, they tend to be quite theatrical, like a performance. They're very friendly, gregarious people. They like inspiration, they like enthusiasm. Classically, these tend to be performing artists, thespians, that sort of thing. Again, not loads of them knocking about in the NHS, but they will like a performance. So if you're trying to get a pitch across to yellow people, they will want something really entertaining. Okay. Green. No, let's go to blue next. So blue are analysts. So they like loads and loads of detail. And if you provided enough detail to them, it's not enough. They want another 400 pages of detail. They want evidence. They want references. They'll want everything. Okay, so they, in some ways, the opposite to red in that regard. And you'll find these types of people as engineers, researchers. So there will be quite a few blue people lurking in the NHS. And then you come to green, who are amiable. They like to help. They're friendly. They don't like big groups, but they will respond very well in small group discussions and be very vocal in those particular environments. They hate change. Okay, and guess what? The NHS is full of green people, supposedly, because they tend to be in the caring professions, social care, nursing, probably in the medical profession as well. So you're going to be dealing with a lot of green types. So if you confront them with something that involves a lot of change, it's going to be difficult for them. Okay, so that in a nutshell is something to think about, where the types of people that you may be confronted with when you pitch ideas, okay, and present culture change. Education and training, this kind of speaks for itself, and most people will think about this when it comes to how they might want to change something. In sepsis, we did lots of things to do with promotional campaigns, and obviously the stuff to do with electronic learning, lots of talking to various professionals about what needed to be done to help improve quality of outcome. So that kind of speaks for itself. social motivation and ability. So this is trying to create environments within, I guess, at the shop floor, the grassroots, ground up kind of way of change. And this is about getting staff on the shop floor to talk about, to engage with, and promote the kind of change that you're looking to implement. There's all sorts of ways of doing this. The most popular is to create champions who will go into ward areas and talk to colleagues, and give education training, that sort of thing, in meal breaks, but also will promote things for us. And this is very powerful. We did recruit sepsis champions early on. And as an example, really, 200 sepsis champions essentially delivered education to 2,000 members of staff. So that is a very rapid way to get the word out, and that happened within just a few weeks. So that's a very powerful tool to have. Now, there's a guy called Malcolm Gladwell, who has written a book called The Tipping Point, and I'd strongly encourage anyone interested in this subject to give it a read. And essentially that's all about how ideas ignite and just spread like wildfire across society. He's identified through that research that there are 3 types of people when you're thinking about approaching groups and about how to spread things through groups of people. About what you need, what are the key types of individuals, if you like, the main opinion formers, those that may help drive an idea to success. And the first are connectors. Now, we will all know about these. These are people like social media influencers, etc. And people that know lots of people and spread the word. The second kind of person you need are mavens, and these are people that know a lot about a lot of things. So these are people that know where you can get stuff. They know the rules and regulations. They are people to go to with knowledge. And the third type of person that you need in your group, if you like, to spread the word socially, are salespeople. So people very gifted at selling an idea, about convincing people it's a good idea to do something. Okay, so if you have those 3 types of individuals working with you within a group, helping maybe swing the opinions to drive a culture change, then you're going to win. And the final element is structural. So changing the economy. So one of the things that we did in sepsis is that we were auditing quite heavily sepsis practices, and every now and again we would spot exemplary levels of practice. So of course, what we did with that is identify those individuals, and they got an award. So simple rewards. So if you go back to our example of the rubbish on the road, classic example there might be, well, chucking the stuff into a net is almost like a reward, I suppose. But if you are to hold on to your rubbish and take it to a bin in the service station, if you put it in the bin and there's a little screen and someone gives a mini fist pump or a high five or something to you, suddenly there's like a reward system going on for doing the right thing. So that's one element of that. Another aspect of that, I guess, reward to a degree, but also to do with education as well. Something we did within sepsis was to a group of us, Mike Little, Matt Woods, and myself, reviewed all the sepsis cases coming to ICU, and against a structured score chart, provided structured feedback to the clinicians that looked after the patients in the first place before they came to ICU, and gave that back via educational supervisors or to the staff directly in certain cases. And most of the time that's very positive feedback with maybe some extra prompts in there, and it's something that staff could use within portfolios as evidence, in appraisals, etc. But also nudge towards maybe slight improvements in practice next time. So that was an extremely successful arm to our sepsis improvement campaign. And then structural ability. So this is using the system to help improve things for us. So examples of this in terms of sepsis really were automated sepsis recognition that came in nerve center. Now this also created other problems, but it meant that the recognition of sepsis on wards in UHL went from something like 50 to 100% overnight because it became an automated process. And so the issues were then further down the line. The provision of sepsis boxes. So everything you need to treat a patient with sepsis was in a sepsis box, ideally aimed at making sure that everything was done that should have been done. That's had variable levels of uptake and success, if I'm honest. The highest impact thing that we introduced at a structural level was the provision of a sepsis team into the emergency department. So essentially, that what we found through our quality improvement work was that we were only getting to certain levels of performance, and there were unseen barriers essentially to delivery of sepsis care within a timely way. So we were fortunate enough to get a grant to put a team in place that essentially knew everything that was needed to be done, looked out for patients with sepsis in the emergency department, and made sure that their treatment happened. They're also there to educate, and in many ways, not just the structural element to this, but all the other sources of influence, such as education and training, social motivation and ability. All of those things were also ticked off by putting this team in place. And what we saw was a massive jump in the improvement of care there, from about 70 to 96% in antibiotics within an hour. We also saw massive reductions in patients waiting more than 3 hours where potential harm was happening. So in many ways, this team is the embodiment of influence, and led to significant improvements in the quality of care and a change in culture. Okay, so that seemed to work out really well. And as I said earlier on, these 6 sources of influence, if you tackle all 6, you're 10 times more likely to have a successful outcome than if you just tackle 1 or 2. So if you just went with an education program and maybe a few talks or some, the nerve center thing, if there's just 1 or 2, you wouldn't get the same level of results unless you went for all 6. And I think one of the major take-home messages today is that you need to spread the way you want to try to influence a team, okay, and not just focus on 1 or 2 little elements. So persuasion. Now there's a lot of text on this slide, but persuasion, I guess, is slightly different to influence in that this is a more kind of personal kind of thing, and it's worth thinking what kind of techniques you as an individual use to persuade someone to do something that they're not too keen on doing. And they fall really into 2 types of persuasion. So rationalizing, using logic, facts, etc., to present your ideas, leverage logic, expertise, and experience to persuade others. So that essentially means you're pushing them in a certain direction. Assertion, that's something else. So using rules, law, authority to again push people in a direction they may not be too keen to go in. Negotiation, now that can run 2 ways, obviously, but compromise, concessions, trade-offs to get maybe collectively going in roughly the right direction. Inspiring, so do you encourage others towards your position by communicating a sense of shared mission and exciting possibility? Do you use inspirational appeals, stories, metaphors to encourage a shared sense of purpose? And bridging, do you influence outcomes by uniting or connecting with others? Rely on reciprocity, Engaging superior support, consultation, building coalitions, that's bridging people together. Now, the bottom three are by and large what we call pull strategies. So things that you're pulling someone with you in the right direction rather than pushing them perhaps against their own will. And it's important to be aware that certainly in our settings, negotiation, bridging, and inspiring are by far the better techniques to use. So as I said, really, there are broadly 6 principles of persuasion. So reciprocity, getting back in kind what you've given as a gift, commitment, desire to maintain consistency in what you've already said or done, social proof, so following the lead of those that are similar to you, liking, so desire to agree with a person who resembles you or shares the same values, authority, desire to trust or agree with an expert based on visual cues, and scarcity, so using the limitation of something as a driver for them to want it. Okay, so that's sort of a brief touch on where we are with persuasion. Now, if you're lucky and things go really well and people are supporting you, the chances are you'll get to a point where things are looking good to implement. That usually leads to a request for resources, and that's not just money. It could be people's time, it could be an office, it could be a piece of equipment to borrow, it could be all sorts of things. So negotiation usually then ensues. So and as humans, we negotiate all the time, but we may not realize it. It's not just about buying and selling a car or a house. It could be who's going to do the washing up tonight, something as simple as that. So negotiation happens all the time. I'm going to touch on it briefly, but the sorts of things that you should always do when you're thinking about a negotiation is first and foremost, prepare yourself psychologically and the information that you have to hand around your pitch, and be extremely convinced by it, and make sure that you've covered off all the potential pieces of information that you need to before going into a negotiation. Negotiations are best when you don't, it's not about people, it's about processes. In the NHS, that usually means a patient's journey of some kind, an improvement in that journey in some way, that you're on one particular side of, and the person that you're negotiating with will probably be on a different side to that. So it's important that you not get personal or emotional about that. It's always best to try and remain fairly passive. But you should also be thinking about what's going on in the other person's mind and be in their shoes, and spend time before going into a negotiation thinking about how they would think about your proposal and what challenges they have. Don't set any red lines, no-go zones or anything, because as soon as you set that, you'll end up crossing them. Okay. And when I come on to talk about the types of negotiation, red lines actually have no meaning. So there are broadly 3 types of negotiation, and they are the win-lose scenario. So that is the typical bartering in a market. That's a one-off with somebody that you're not likely to negotiate with again in the future, in a one-off capacity over the price of something, for example, and you're trying to gain an advantage and them a disadvantage. Okay, that's a very destructive and negative type of negotiation. The problem is that those type of win-lose negotiations sometimes find themselves into the NHS, which they shouldn't find themselves. Okay, so win-lose negotiations are not good. What we should be focusing on in healthcare are win-win and we-win negotiations. So win-win negotiations are essentially a mutually beneficial discussion. So for example, let's make something up. So you've got an idea that you want to use a new ultrasound machine, let's say for a procedure on ICU. Unfortunately, that machine doesn't exist in the ICU, but is held, let's say, by the vascular access team. So you go to negotiate with them. You want to have that machine on the unit for your procedure, and have to talk to them about borrowing it. Okay, so how does that go? Their initial reaction is to say, I want your machine for 2 hours a day every week, is going to be fairly negative, I would say. And that would be a win-lose type of discussion. So win-wins tend to be much more multi-dimensional, and would be along the lines of, yes, we'd like to borrow your machine, but hey, we've got clinicians, senior trainees that would maybe like to come to your team and help with your service. And there's then kind of that sort of mutuality about all of this. And then suddenly extra dimensions are built in, and there's a benefit on both sides. And if you really want to develop that, then you get to the we win situation, which is a more long-term kind of synergistic future in which both teams develop and big things happen and a service grows to become exceptional. So they're the kind of negotiations that we should focus on. Unfortunately, the way NHS organisations like UHL are set up, where there is rationing of services, money, people, etc., we often get challenged into competitive discussions. So say between CMGs, for example, where it becomes competitive and win-lose type discussions happen. And that shouldn't happen. As I say, it should be on the process, the focus on the process and a patient pathway. Patients don't know what CMG they're in. Patients just know they're getting healthcare. And if we start going down the lines of, well, we're ITAPs and we want to have more money and more services than say than chugs, then that's not going to go well for a patient. They don't know what CMG they're in. So negotiation, there's a lot to it, and there's again another resource that I can give you, the Negotiation book by Nicole Soames. That's a really good little bullet pointed book that tells you the pros and cons of good negotiations. So I'll wrap up. In the NHS particularly, getting new ideas off the ground is tough. Okay, for all sorts of reasons. Resources are tight. People tend to have green personalities, so they don't like change. Okay, but getting things off the ground is tough. So frame any pitch that you might have going into management meetings or anyone that will listen to you in a structure, a bit like SBAR, in terms of why the sales pitch, what the clear objective of what you're planning to do, how the nitty-gritty of how it's all going to happen, and what are the potential barriers or challenges to think if things don't go according to plan. Okay, so that's how you pitch yourself. Think about the crucial moments and vital behaviours that might lead to a culture change, and utilise all 6 sources of influence to drive changes in those vital behaviours, so that things change for the better. Think about the personalities of people that you're talking to and adjust accordingly. So a simple bulleted list of things for someone that might be red, but a detailed portfolio of all the evidence for someone that's blue. You know, that's what you would need to do. Use pull tactics rather than push tactics to persuade. So rather than being all authoritarian and telling people how it should be, bridge and take them with you. Maybe try to set the right sort of example. Negotiate without emotion and try for win-win or we win type scenarios. And that's me done. Dr. Keeshan's just said that he wished he'd seen this presentation before he sent me an email this morning. Well, that's interesting. So there's a question, opportunity for trainees to sit in business meetings. Well, the answer to that, I think, is yes. Certainly the senior trainees are invited to some of the consultants' business meetings. I don't know, Alex, if you want to add to that at all, but yeah, and then applying to be trainee representatives on various forums across the trust, you can do. I know we have representation at various corporate meeting groups. There is usually a junior doctor's representative at those. But in a nutshell, if anyone is keen and wants to be involved in anything, then they're more than welcome. Okay, well, I'll leave it there, and thanks very much for your time, and enjoy the rest of the day.